Yeah, I'm just really looking for a lot of help right now.
Hey, listen, don't worry about it, man. I got you, bro. I got you.
I got you. Trust me.
You can trust me. I got your back.
Look, trust me, man. I got you.
Don't worry. I got you.
Confía en mí, todo va a estar bien.
Good morning. Good to see you guys. If I haven't met you, my name is Adam, and I am the campus pastor here at our Corona campus. And before we jump into the message today, I just want to point out this glow-in-the-dark hot tub up here. That is a symbol that we are going to be baptizing some folks today. In fact, we've got people signed up in both of our services to be baptized, and we're so excited about it. We just think it is one of the greatest privileges to get to baptize people and celebrate the faith decision that they've made in their life to follow Jesus. And the reason why I mention it to you right now is because not only do we have people that are already signed up, but we think that there may be a few people in here that are like, man, I didn't sign up. And I didn't know I was going to do this, but as you're sitting through service today, you may have this sense that like, man, today is supposed to be my day too. I've given my life to Christ. I've been stalling. I haven't really taken this next step yet, but I want to celebrate with all of these people. And if that's you today, we are fully prepared for you. In fact, if you look over right to the I guess it's your right, my left, there is a little rack here that's got a bunch of T-shirts and towels and all sorts of stuff. We have prepared for you, even if sort of spontaneously, last minute, you decide you want to get baptized today. And if that is you, you can actually head back at any point during the service to Jess. She's going to wave right there. She is right by our baptism sign, and you can go back and say hey to her, and she'll get you all set up. But we cannot wait to celebrate with you today. And so with that, we're going to dive into today's message. And we've been in this series called Trust Issues. And we've been talking about this idea of how trust is difficult, it's tricky, and we all want it, but we all have been wounded in the process of like maybe giving it. And how do you recover from that? What do you do? How does trust actually work? And that's the thing that I think a lot of us are confused about. So we've been talking through that over these last few weeks. And today we are going to take the fourth step in that direction. And I want to encourage you to take some notes today. I would say if there are a handful of messages a year that you want to write down exactly like sort of the steps of what's being said, I think today is one of those days as we talk about how to recover or how to rebuild trust that's been broken. And so I want to encourage you, write some things down that stand out to you, take pictures of the slides, whatever you need to do to sort of take this with you and be able to sort of think about it or discuss it later. And if you are taking notes, the title of my message is, There's No Coming Back from That. There is no coming back from that. One of my sisters, I have 4 sisters, which is probably why I'm a little bit weird. And I was talking to one of my sisters on the phone the other day, and we grew up in Kansas in a few different locations, and there was this one small town we grew up in called Iola, Kansas, which at the time was the divorce capital of the world. That's what they were famous for. Don't put that on your welcome to sign, okay? Oh, man, I can't wait for this fresh start. What are they known for? Capital of divorce. Okay, this is going to be great for us, sweetie. We're not going to be one of the stats. But we went and we lived there for a long period of time, and one of my sisters was like, man, I loved it there. Like, I had so many great memories, and I was like, I hated it there because of Hans Krohn. I still remember his name. That kid was a friggin' jerk, okay? He was so mean, like he tortured me. One time he threw a pine cone in the back of my head in a parking lot that was full of people. It was so embarrassing and it was painful, and like I hated him forever, and I still hate him, and he ruined that whole stage of my life. And my sister on the phone, like, she was really quiet. Like, I was driving and talking to her in the car, and I thought maybe I'd cut out. And like, you still there? And she's like, yeah, no, I'm here. Which is just her way of being like, yeah, I'm just processing how crazy you are. And she was like, weren't you guys like both in the 4th grade then? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, maybe it's time to let that one go. To which I replied, how dare you? Okay? I can't even believe you would suggest such a thing. Hans is pure evil, was and is, and he is my arch nemesis, and he is probably in prison rotting where he belongs as we speak. And that was about where she hung up on purpose. She didn't want to continue the conversation. And I was worked up. I was surprised at how sweaty I was just having that conversation, just bringing that guy up. I was like, whew, I'm getting a little bothered by this fourth grade interaction. I could still feel the pine cone, you know what I mean, in the back of my head. And I bring this up because I think that you probably got these people in your life too, right? People that when you think about them, just the thought of them makes you mad. Other people sometimes are like, hey, don't bring that person up around you because they know how you get. And maybe your stories aren't as long ago. Maybe your stories are a little bit more recent. And maybe what happened to you was a little bit more painful than a pine cone to the back of the head. Maybe that person lied to you. Maybe they gossiped about you. Maybe they stole from you or they cheated on you. And maybe it wasn't just one time. Maybe there was a pattern that they had in your relationship with them. And when you think about it, you're like, man, I'm not sure I could ever forgive them, let alone trust them again. You gotta be kidding me. In fact, maybe this Jesus line sort of hits close to home for you. This is something Jesus said, John chapter 2, verse 23. It says, many began to trust Jesus, but Jesus didn't trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. Have you ever felt like this? You ever felt like this exact thing where you're like, oh, you may trust me, but I don't trust you. I know all about you. I know exactly how you are and what's in your heart. I mean, we don't, right? We feel like we do at times, but we don't. I mean, only God really has access to people's thoughts and motives, their interior world. All we really have access to are people's words and actions. But sometimes, what we've taken in of those things has made us decide that, man, we don't want to have anything to do with that person ever again. Because what they did just feels irredeemable. And maybe you've sort of wondered, does everybody really deserve a second chance? Aren't there some people that you can just sort of throw away? How does this work? If someone were to deserve a second chance, how do you decide who gets one and who doesn't? How does this whole thing actually operate? Because when someone hurts you in a deep sort of way, trusting them, again, I think isn't just a decision, it's a dilemma, right? It feels like a choice between two bad options because if we don't trust that person again, it feels like we're going to lose everything that we had with them, which for some of us is an awful lot. We've built a career around them. We built a family around them. We built a season of our life around that person. But other people, we feel like, man, if we do trust this person again, then we're going to have to move past what they did to us, and we're not sure we can do that either. So what do you do? Are you just supposed to shut off your feelings and immediately start trusting someone who hurt you again? I don't suggest that. That sounds like a bad idea. But here's something that I hope helps you today. Trust isn't a switch you flip, it's a path you walk. I think a lot of times we think that we're going to start trusting people again by just being like, you know what, I decide to trust you. And then it's just all of a sudden everything is all good all over again. But it's not like that. It's a path, it's a process. And part of that process is deciding if it's something you can even do. So what is the process? What does it look like? How do you do it? What steps would you take? And this is what I want to unpack for you this morning. In fact, I want to give you 4 steps to rebuilding trust in a relationship. And I'm going to get really practical today. So for those of you that are just like, oh, you just need to learn to trust again. You're like, I'm in. What do I do? These are going to be the things that you would actually do. And the first thing is this. You need time to recover, which means to actively heal from what happened to you. And think about this. If you were to break your leg, right, you wouldn't go back to running the next day. And if somebody else breaks your heart, it's not smart to go back to trusting the next day. Because if you treat something that's broken as if it's not, you'll break it worse. And a lot of times we understand this sort of physically, but we don't understand this emotionally or relationally in our lives because we're impatient. We're so impatient that we rush physical recovery. And we're so impatient that we oftentimes flat out ignore emotional recovery in our lives. When a bone is broken, right, you have to like put a cast on it and stay off it until you can heal. And when trust is broken, you really need to do the same thing. Rushing back in to things being okay is not a wise move. And if somebody broke trust in your life, that's likely what they want you to do. Can we just forget it, put it behind us, and you just start trusting me the next day? That's like being like, sorry that your leg broke in half. Let's run a marathon together. That's crazy. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 13, the advice that this early pastor gives, he says, make straight paths for your feet so that what is broken in you won't break further, but heal. In other words, what this author is saying is that healing is a slow, intentional journey. But a lot of us, we're like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for slow and intentional. I don't even like those words, okay? And our impulses are to do one of two extreme things. To either be like, you know what, it's okay, I'm fine, I'm sure it won't happen again. Everyone's like, oh, I don't know. Or to swing to the other extreme, which is to be like, you know what, I just need to be done with this. And so, I can't ever trust them again or anyone like them. And so I'm just done. I cut them off. They don't exist. But in order to pace yourself properly and heal fully, you are going to need to include other people in this process, which oftentimes makes us feel uncomfortable, but you're going to need to surround yourself with people you feel safe with and supported by to help you figure out how to heal. In other words, we all need emotionally healthy, spiritually grounded people to help us pause and process and pray and get perspective and face the depth of our pain and make peace with the thing that happened to us. And it takes a while. And in my experience, it often requires a lot of ice cream, okay? Just being honest with you guys. Much like physical therapy, the worse the injury, the more involved the recovery. And the same thing is true on the relational or the emotional side. Like the worse the injury that has been done to you, the longer and more involved the process of recovery to putting things back together. And so how do you know that you are healing? Like if it's about recovering first, like how can you even clock if you are or have recovered? I think this is a helpful idea. This is from Proverbs chapter 17, verse 9. One wisdom writer says, love prospers when a fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends. In other words, essentially what this writer is saying is that moving on means no longer being consumed by what they did to you. Like that's where like we all do this, right? Where you replay it over and over in your head. You get angry every time somebody mentions their name. Anytime somebody gives you an opening in your life, you can't wait to give all of the sordid details about why they are the worst person ever. The goal is getting to a place where you won't allow your deep hurt from them to dictate your ability to enjoy your life. This is how you know that you have recovered. In the same way, where if you broke something on your body, you will know that you've recovered when you can actually walk down the hall and actually have a conversation with someone without the entire time just thinking like, ow, ow, right? And this is sometimes how we walk through life, right? Is that we have been so injured and we continue to replay and rehash what's happened. And it's like almost like instead of letting it heal, we're just ripping it off over and over and over again. And we've never recovered. And once you recover, you can move on to step number 2, which is this, to forgive. to forgive, which is to let go of your anger and decide they don't owe you anymore. Now, this is the one nobody wants to do. Some of you are like, you can move on to the next one because I'm not going to do that. Is it okay to skip steps? Because when someone, right, they've betrayed us or broken our trust, our first reaction is just anger. And I got to tell you, it should be. That's healthy. In fact, unless you're angry, there's nothing to forgive. You can't forgive without anger because anger tells us that something is wrong and needs to be made right. In order to work through it, though, you've got to identify what's beneath it, which means you have to name what they did and what it is you lost. And these are not the same thing. Because what they did is often an action, and what you lost is typically a way of being, thinking, or feeling. And a lot of times it's hard to slow down and put words to these things. I remember like the first place that Gretchen and I lived together, we got this apartment, and it was really cool, but it was not in the best part of town. And we're like, why is it so cheap? We didn't know, we didn't get it. And early on into living there, somebody broke into my car and stole everything out of it. Actually took my car and like wrecked it down the street. And it was this horrible thing that happened. And I got my car back, and I was able to submit everything to insurance, and I was able to replace all the stuff that was broken. I was able to fix the guitar, the car itself. I was able to get things as repaired as I possibly could, right? But the thing I was never really able to get back was my ability to walk through that parking lot without feeling like something bad was going to happen there, especially when my wife was with me. The nervousness that something horrible was going to happen in that space, that's what I lost. And again, this is what makes trust issues and betrayal so deep, is because the action led to what you lost, but it's not the same as what you lost. And in order to heal, we have to be able to name both of these things. And just like it did with me, being able to fully articulate what you lost often immediately intensifies your anger. When you stumble onto the thing that it actually cost you because of what they did, you're not like, oh, well, we're good now. You're like, yes, that is what I lost. And it really fuels your anger even further. And a lot of what that anger is wanting to go back to how we were or thought or felt before that happened, and knowing that we can't. Because even if they say sorry, and even if they try and do things to make up for it, they can't give back the illusion that you have a close-knit family, that you can unskeptically continue to trust all authority. They can't give back the relaxed feeling that comes from assuming that nobody close to you would ever betray you. These are things that they took, that you lost, that you cannot recover. Because of what they did, your world is a little bit more uncertain, unsafe, unkind, unfriendly, or unpredictable. And in fact, this is what unforgiveness is. Unforgiveness is the unrelenting anger that because of what you did, I can no longer be who I was before. And that's why it's hard to let go of. And you know what's infuriating about that statement? Because of what you did, I can no longer be who I was before. You're right. You can't. But this is the paradox that is wrapped up in this reality, is that the longer you hold this against them, the more bitter, vengeful, and closed off you'll become. And some of us are like, man, I get that I maybe should forgive, that I need to forgive, that it would be good if I did forgive. I don't know if I can get there. Some of us are waiting on them to at least feel bad, say they're sorry. Maybe they could grovel a little bit or a lot. That'd be amazing. But in all honesty, and you're definitely not going to want to hear this, forgiveness doesn't require anything of the other person. And this is how I know this is true. The Apostle Paul wrote this in the book of Romans chapter 5, verse 8. He says, God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. In other words, when we weren't sorry and when we were still doing it, Jesus forgave us. And then he punctuates that forgiveness by saying, it is finished. And when Jesus says it is finished on the cross, he's saying this about all things, all sin that has been done, but specifically the things that have been done against him by the people in front of him. And what he's saying to them is, you don't owe me for this. I don't expect you to fix it, and I don't hate you for what happened. That's forgiveness. Because this is what forgiveness is. It's choosing to stop expecting the other person to pay you back for what you lost and can't recover. But I want to be clear. Just because you have forgiven them does not mean you trust them. It's important that you get this because these are different things with different requirements. Forgiveness has to do with letting go of the past, but trust has to do with how we are going to operate in the future. You have to forgive in order to trust, but just because you've forgiven doesn't mean you have to trust. And this is essential to sort out in your own mind. Forgiveness only requires something of me, but trust requires something from both of us. And this brings us to step number 3, to evaluate, to determine what it is you really want and if it's even possible. I don't know if you've thought about this before, but it is really hard to work toward what you want if you don't know what it is. You've seen that meme online, right? Like, what do you want? I don't know. It's like, I can't help you. And so you're going to need to reflect and make some decisions. Like, do I even want to move forward with this person? Are there any good reasons to rebuild this relationship? Is it even salvageable? Like, what would this cost me? Like, big picture, like, what's at stake here? And am I able to even do the necessary work to begin to put things back together again? These are questions that you're going to have to dig deep into your own soul to figure out about you and what you want. And I found that for me, especially the higher and the bigger the emotional stakes, because the deeper the pain, the more it requires you to sit with other people to come up with the answers to these questions. Because it's a lot of deep soul searching. And sometimes it's difficult to come up with these answers. But the second part of evaluating is figuring out if what you want is even something the other person is capable of. So how do you figure that out? Scripture divides people into 3 different categories based on how they respond to confrontation. I think this is really interesting. The first way that the first category of people is what it calls people who are wise, right? People that when you confront them, they're going to humbly listen. They're going to own and apologize for whatever their part was, and they're going to adjust their behavior so that it actually is good for everybody involved. Not just you and not just them, but everybody involved in the situation. In fact, Proverbs chapter 9, verse 8 and 9 says, if you correct the wise, they'll love you. Instruct the wise, and they'll be even wiser. Right? So it's like people that when you actually are like, hey, I need to tell you this about you. This is what's going on between us. This is the trouble I'm having. This is what I need from you. They're appreciative to learn new information and to actually grow as a person. Some of you are like, man, there must not be very many wise people. You were correct. The second category is what the Bible calls fools. Both Proverbs and Mr. T call these people fools. And these are people that when you confront them, they're defensive and combative, right? You don't even get out like, hey, the thing, and they're like, well, what you don't get is, right? Immediately coming back at you. They deny that they have any real deficiencies. They insist that anything that went wrong or frustrating is actually all everyone else's fault. They don't have any ownership whatsoever. They only did what they did because of what somebody else did, and it's really all them. Again, in Proverbs chapter 9, verses 7 and 8, it says this: anyone who rebukes a mocker will receive an insult in return. Don't bother correcting fools, they'll only hate you. You've been there, right? Right, where you tried to address something with someone because you were trying to help them, and they were like, how dare you tell me that true thing about me? I hate you from here on out. And you're like, that backfired. Probably shouldn't have said anything. And then the last category is those who are wicked. These are people who have a genuine desire to hurt you, to wreck your reputation, or to physically or emotionally wound you. And when you realize that you are dealing with one of these people, do not do it alone. I do think this, though. I think a lot of times when a fool has hurt us, we label them as wicked when they're not. And sometimes we assume that somebody who is wicked is maybe just a little bit foolish. This is why we need to invite other people into our lives to help us figure out who it is we're dealing with. But when you figure out that you're dealing with somebody who's wicked, don't do it alone. This is why 911 is a thing. This is why restraining orders are necessary. This is why courtrooms have armed officers on standby in the back of the courtroom. This is why safe houses exist. This is why sometimes attorneys tell us that we should only communicate to that person through them. If somebody is dead set on hurting you, they need to be held accountable by someone other than you, because it's dangerous. In fact, Proverbs 9, verse 7 just says it really bluntly. Anyone who corrects the wicked will get hurt. You try and correct somebody who's actively trying to ruin you, they will hurt you. That is their goal, which means don't do it alone. And here's why you need to know who you're dealing with, because if the other person won't own their part, sincerely apologize, and address their problematic behavior, you can't really be reconciled to them. And you know what they're going to say? I thought you were a Christian. You're like, I am. And Jesus doesn't want me to be reconciled to you either. We are at an impasse, but not because of something I am unwilling to do, but because of something you are unwilling to do. Reconciliation takes both of us. And for some people, the best thing is just to say, like, listen, I forgive you. I hope you have a great life, but I can't be in this relationship or work here or live in this house or be a part of this organization anymore. But if you do choose to move forward with them, then you move on to step number 4. And step number 4 is to experiment. Experiment, which is to give them opportunities to prove they're trustworthy incrementally. Because trust is built with baby steps. Often the other person wants to be trusted in big ways right away, and that's a bad idea. In fact, Jesus says it this way, Luke chapter 16, verse 10. If you're faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in large ones. And most of us are like, why don't you just give me a large one to start? And you're like, because that would be stupid. In other words, start small and build slowly over time. It looks like, hey, let's try this low stakes experiment and let's see how that goes. And if that goes great, we'll do another little slightly bigger one and we'll build on that and we'll build on that. By the way, nobody should be confused about the purpose or the parameters of the experiment. You're not running a trust experiment if nobody knows it exists. That's just a mind game, okay? Just so you know. And it shouldn't be something that you do in secret just between you and the other person. Other people that you trust need to know about the experiment. They need to be able to monitor the situation and hold you both accountable to it. And the more specific you are, the more helpful it is. Like, I'll just give you an example. Like, hey, why don't you try to be nicer sometimes? Not a good experiment. What does that mean, right? Like, I don't know how to do that. Like, how do we make that happen? It needs to look like I'd like to see this exact behavior from you under these circumstances in this time frame. You need to label it in this specific way. I'd like to see this behavior from you under these circumstances in this time frame, if you want to rebuild trust in this area with me. And some of you are going to feel guilty about this, but you are not asking something random or unreasonable, right? It needs to be something that is actually connected to the thing in the area where trust was broken. This is not punitive, it's restorative. They need to demonstrate that they are growing in the area where trust was broken over time. Because without a structured plan, rebuilding trust is just a wish. And wishes don't always come true, no matter what you learned on the Disney Channel. Again, if you broke a bone, you wouldn't go for a run the day the cast came off, right? You're going to crumple to the ground real quick. In fact, what would happen, right? After you'd recovered and after you just like, okay, here's my goals, and after you sort of laid out, you would have this plan, this series of experiments that you would run, right? The doctor would tell you to do a series of stretching exercises to build your strength, each of which are going to be like unbelievably, almost unbearably painful the first time you do them. You ever broken something before? And they're like, now just move your toe out a centimeter. You're like, psh, I got that. Ah! Right? Now hold it. And you're like, I'm going to die, right? And but slowly over time, as you continue to repeat these exercises, as you complete these stretches, right? Like you begin to gain your range of motion back. And this is how a trust experiment works, right? It is slowly experimenting with trust in small ways in that area with that person to see if they actually can build a fresh track record and be reliable. And every time you take that little step of trust, guess what? It's going to be painful. It's going to stretch you. It is going to hurt. It's going to be hard. But as you continue and as they prove themselves to you, things will begin to heal. And just know that if you're the person that broke trust with somebody else and you're trying to build it back, rebuilding trust is going to require other people to check in on you, which means you're going to have to let go of your defensiveness and get okay with being questioned. And isn't this the part that we hate? I want to rebuild trust, but I don't want anybody checking up on me, asking me where I was, what I was doing, or be suspicious even though I broke their trust 50,000 times before. That's unrealistic. That's not the way it works. And in fact, if you allow them to question you about where you've been, what you did, what happened, but you're defensive every time, that doesn't feel like a safe relationship to enter back into. And this is why most people bail on rebuilding trust, because it requires you to be incredibly humble in ways we don't want to have to be. And the reason these 4 steps are essential is that repairing a breach of trust requires both people to want it, work for it, seek help, and demonstrate reliability over time. And here's why I think Jesus followers ought to do and commit themselves to this hard work. This is really interesting verse in the book of Philippians. Apostle Paul writes this to one of the first churches. He says this, "Let everyone see that you're considerate in all you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon." And I think this is fascinating for a lot of reasons, but essentially what the Apostle Paul is saying here is, listen, if we believe that Jesus is coming back soon, then there's really one thing we ought to be known for as Christians. And I know some of you are thinking, I know what it is. Railing on injustice, calling other people out, getting the right elected officials into office, legislating our version of morality, stockpiling food and weapons. But according to Paul, it's making sure that everyone can see that you are compassionate in all you do. Is that how you're known? No matter what happened in your life, no matter what took place, no matter what frustrations you have,
Can people look at your life and say, I'll tell you one thing though, they are very considerate. They're compassionate. They think about life from more than just their perspective. It's a high bar. It's hard to live in this place. It's so high, in fact, I don't think you can do it without Jesus in your life. And I don't know your situation, but I do wonder, what would it look like for you to humble yourself in an attempt to walk the steps that heal relational rifts in your life? So here's your homework. To identify somebody in your life that you'd like to rebuild trust with in a certain area and ask them what they would need to see from you to grow their trust in you. What do you need to see from me in order for me to earn your trust again? And then take whatever they say back to the people in your life that you do trust. Those people who are emotionally mature and spiritually grounded, and talk about this is what they said. What do I do next? Is this request reasonable? Is this something that I need to humble myself and do? Is this crazy and punitive, or is this restorative? Is this a trust experiment that is worth me embarking on? You need that community around you to help you know what to do. And this is why I think it's so important to be part of a church community, to be part of a small group, to have people that you sit with every single Sunday morning, because we need people in our lives to help us deal with all of the other people in our lives, because it is complicated to be a person. And yet everything in life that's good is built on the back of trust, which is why we need to figure out how to rebuild it and reestablish it when it's been broken, and how to identify when we can't because it's not available. And I want to pray that God would give you the discernment in your life to be able to walk this path well. Would you bow your heads across this room? I want to pray this into your life today. God, we believe that you love us, that your grace is sufficient for us. God, we're so grateful that you don't just try and help us have a good relationship with you, but you aim to give us tools to have good relationships with every person in our orbit. And a lot of us, we have been wounded. We've been hurt. Most of us, we've hurt other people. Trust has been broken with us, and we have broken trust. Some of us in big ways, some of us in small ways, and we're not really sure how to put things back together again. And God, I pray that today, as you've given us a path to move forward, that you would put the right people around us to help us discern what to do next, to walk with us every step of the journey, to encourage us, to counsel us, to help us know what to do and how to do it, to be with us, to pray for us, to stand next to us. And God, I pray that we would be people who in everything that we do, whether we move forward in a relationship or whether we say man, I wish you well, but I think this is where the road ends for us. I pray that we would do everything we do in a way that is considerate and compassionate, no matter who's looking on. God, leverage this path to bring healing in relationships that felt like there was no coming back from. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.